Adults usually tell you to read, but then they don't read and go on their phones. My teachers and my dad do that.
I was inspired to read because of the way my school taught reading. It was all about getting through to the next book. It was about getting through to the next level, to get to the next point, to get to the next point. So I suppose my role models were the other competitive children around me. Peers were a huge influence, and unfortunately reading for pleasure wasn't a cool thing. So much so that when I got an award for being a good student at the end of year 7 and I got a book token, I actually think, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I think I sold my book token to my granddad. By the end of secondary school, the thing that allowed me to get into reading for pleasure, because it then became cool, was sports biographies. And there were some that came out in the press and we were all reading those. And by the time I got to university, it was a case of, particularly in that genre of reading, it became a big thing and it became cool to read. And I think it just made me realise that peer role models, if you have those around you, it can be really, really important.
Having those role models is really important, but obviously we're kind of trying to find out, if people haven't got those role models at home, how can we be bringing that into school, and also seeing the power that the teachers can have?
I can't honestly say from a school perspective that there was anyone that I can think of, particularly in my later years of primary school, that I could say that was a person that changed that for me.
These children that I work with who've not got parents as role models really need someone alongside them, and I would almost say colluding. You know, sharing the fun and laughing at the bits we get wrong and looking back to see where that chain of thought started. And that's what we need to give them.
I think every teacher in the country right now, how many will be encouraging children to read right now? We all know the value of it. But there is a difference between encouraging children to read and modelling reading. And from my own experience, I think I probably spent the first 10, 12 years of my teaching career feeling quite good about myself, that I'm encouraging children to read on a regular basis. I would check what they're reading, I'd make sure they're reading their requisite number of pages, having a rough idea of the book they're reading. So I don't think any child I've ever taught could ever say that, you know, my teacher of mine, he didn't encourage me to read. But it was only really when one thing happened that really changed it, that I felt as if it was more effective than ever. And that's when I started to read the books that the children were reading. And I can look back and, you know, almost take myself out of myself and look back and look at me from 5 years ago and beyond, when I would encourage children to read, but it wouldn't go beyond that, to now encouraging children to read. And I know the books they're reading. I can talk about the characters. I can talk about related books. I can recommend books to them. And I can think of a time during a World Book Day, and I won't say the name of the book, but I think you can probably work it out. As a boy, I decided to wear a dress for the day, and I've still got pictures on my phone for it, because I thought this will really impact, this will be hugely impactful. They'll see me wearing a dress, they'll want to go and read that book. But then I realised very young during the day, I hadn't read the book. And I compare that to a class reader we've just had, where because of a love of an author, we decided to read that as our class text, and I read it twice before I got there, and it was completely different. One was simply reading, and one I put on a dress, but because I knew the book inside out.
The connections that you can make with children when you have that shared experience of reading the same book, or reading books that are by the same author. Perhaps they've read one that you haven't read, and then you can have that conversation. What do you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Are there any others that you could recommend to me? It's such a great way of creating that community in the classroom, in the school, for them to see you as a reader as well. Perhaps there's not other adults that they see reading.
That's right.
So if they've got somebody that they can go, oh, that person actually likes the same books that I like, and they enjoyed the same part of that book that I thought was really funny or really scary. I mean, the real beauty of schools is that you've got people that are from all walks of life with so many different interests, and within that community you are going to have people that really love reading and will want to be proclaiming it from the rooftops. But actually it's quite useful to see those other adult role models that might be saying, actually, I really like reading cookbooks, or I really like reading books about this particular computer game that I like. And I think there's real benefit in children seeing those role models and seeing that actually reading is everywhere. That it doesn't have to be your typical fiction, non-fiction. It can be such a breadth. I think there's that concept of the reading river, isn't there? And making children see that actually, even though they might not see themselves as a reader, if they're reading a manual for their computer game, they're reading a recipe, they're reading something in the paper, they're reading a blog online about a review of a game that they like, all of those things still make them a reader. And so I think as adults, if we can be being those genuine role models saying, yeah, I'm not sure about that book, or actually I'm finding it hard to choose something new to read, or yeah, this particular genre of book, not my cup of tea, but actually I really like reading this thing. I think that can be really helpful for children to see that it can be tricky to find something to read.
We've got to find a way of making context visible. So I've taken a lot of blurbs and interspersed them with pictures so that if they didn't know about wolves in the wild or ships that went to America in 1710, it's something we can talk about before we start getting into the story. They did a survey in 2009 and they found that children's role models up to the age of year 6 were parents. And after that, it was peers and teachers. And so when I read with them, I read the right-hand page because that's usually the first page that starts the chapter, and it sets the tone, and we can do a bit of context, and if necessary I can show them pictures of what things look like, and they read the left-hand page, and then the right-hand page means they've got a chance to rest. You know, they tell me bits about football, and I now watch football avidly, and my team is Arsenal, and I know all about Saka, so I've got street cred. Tomorrow I'm allowed to work with the sixth form, and we're going to get them trained up to be buddies. I mean, that works well for them because it's a voluntary role which counts towards clearance to university and Duke of Edinburgh's award schemes. But I'm going to have to monitor the relationships and make sure that we've paired them up properly and that I'm there to give, you know, help as they go along. They're going to know how to share books with their children,
Completely.
those sixth formers.
Sustainable.
And so we break the cycle, don't we?
You are showing them how it can be pleasurable. You're giving them that nice thing, that gift of a story, and helping them see.
And you know, we were talking before about films and people not reading a book and then not wanting to see it on film in case it destroyed their picture. Well, I think we have to understand that when we're reading a book, the author's written that story, but we've got our own story we bring to it. And in the middle ground, there's this other story that my reader and I share by swapping anecdotes, you know? And that's how they kind of relax enough to get into it and see the fun.
But actually finding the time in a very, very busy curriculum, a very, very busy school term, is actually hard to find. And I think our roles as leading that reading culture in the school is crucial to, like I say, celebrate other ways. It doesn't just need to be sitting on a sofa at home. It can be listening to it, going for a run, listening to an audio book. It could be in the car listening to something. As a parent, what I found, my library of books has increased. I think I lived on that for a while. The books that I read with my children became the books that I would share with the class as well. But it is about finding that space.
Space, it reminded me of a boy who really had trouble focusing, and he loved space, but we literally orbited round the book. And I'd get him to read the odd paragraph that I thought he might be interested in. He'd do that and he'd humour me. But basically what he was saying was, these books in the library, they're old hat. It happened last year, 10 years ago. And so one day I went in with half a page from the paper about an asteroid heading this way, and it was on collision course with Earth, and scientists were wondering whether they could blow it up without endangering the planet. And we read the first sort of small paragraph, and then the bell went for a break, and he was off, and I thought, I've lost him. When he got to the door, he stopped, turned around and said, "Can I have that?" "Yes, fine, take it." And I thought, that's the last I'll ever hear of that. But 2 days later, when I was in the school The science teacher stopped me in the corridor and said, "Oh," and he won't tell you his name, but was on fire the other day, and he clearly read the whole lot. And, you know, it meant something to him. And he'd got kudos for reading it and knowing about it and understanding it. And, you know, that might just be the little spark that leads him into using reading more efficiently, I suppose.
And sharing those stories with staff members as well, so that they can see the impact that those little interactions had. You as that role model for that child, and how that can change that child's reading habits because of the interactions you had with them.
It's the knowledge of the child as the reader as well, isn't it? Knowing their interests. My current class, it's a very boy-heavy cohort, and they are all into football.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few children that are less keen on reading, perhaps because they find it hard, perhaps because they've got other things that they want to be doing with their time. So I've brought in a few football books recently, and it's kind of opened a bit of a door for them to be like, oh, actually,
this is legitimate.
I can be interested in this. We've got the Guinness Book of World Records. So they're finding all the kind of football related parts of that, being able to actually find a book that interests them. And they can read it socially as well. They can read it together.
But I'm really learning too in these football books. You know, we come across words like feint, F-E-I-N-T, which we discuss, and, you know, they tell me about, did you see so-and-so, and where he fainted the other day? And, you know, it's just wonderful. It's so rewarding.
Your role in that is crucial. That wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen unless you tuned into what was needed, the passion they had, got a selection of books, put it in front of them. That wouldn't happen. Children would have read less as a result of that.
My husband can't believe I watch football matches now.
I'm there. It's changed your life then as well. All because of reading, eh?
Yeah.
One day I have a dream, one day we have 5 inset days where we can commit half a day, whether it's a morning or an afternoon, and everybody just sits in their classroom and says, right, you've got 3 hours, here's your book. Here's your book, go and read that. No comeback on that. If you enjoy it, make that a class reader.